42 years ago, an ordinary morning in Decatur, Alabama turned into a tragedy that changed the entire town. A 77-year-old man, Arthur Zellman, left home to visit his wife at the nursing home and vanished without a trace. His silver car was never found either. The police called it an unexplained disappearance, while locals whispered about a suicide out of despair. But something in the Zellman house made all those theories fall apart. Papers arranged perfectly, the door ajar, lights still on, and the teapot on the stove long since drained dry. Then the years passed. The file gathered dust, leaving only rumors and hauntings, until a young lieutenant, Carver, accidentally reopened the file labeled Cold Case. Everything began to change. A small mark in the mud, a streak of mismatched paint on the door, and seemingly meaningless details suddenly connected into a terrifying secret. That secret wasn't just buried under the waters of Wheeler Lake, but hidden in the seemingly most moral, most trusted people of this community. What started as a simple disappearance gradually turned into a chain of deception, betrayal, and sin covered up by faith. Join us in turning back time to Alabama in 1982 to uncover the story that made an entire town tremble, where faith, lies, and justice cast their shadows down onto those calm waters. Before we dive into this journey, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe that the truth, no matter how buried, will rise to the surface, don't forget to hit subscribe. On a March morning in 1982, Decatur, Alabama, was still covered in a thin, damp mist of early spring. In the small wooden house on Old Highway 20, Arthur Zellman, 77 years old, woke up early as he did every day. He brewed tea, stacked the morning newspaper next to the old radio still playing country music, then carefully selected a neat outfit, the gray wool coat frayed at the collar. On the table, he placed his brown leather bag, the item he always carried with him on visits to Mitchell Nursing Home, where his wife, Eleanor, was being treated for terminal cancer. Arthur had visited her regularly for the past 4 months, never missing a session. Around 9:15, he opened the door, adjusted the wedding photo frame on the shelf, locked the door, and stepped out onto the porch. The neighbor, Mrs. Mabel Carter, who was watering her plants, saw him wave hello before getting into his 1979 silver Chevy Caprice. The car started sluggishly, and then rolled eastward down the sloping road toward downtown Decatur. Mrs. Carter remembered his smile that morning, very clearly, kind, normal, with no signs of anything amiss. The rest of that day passed quietly. The sky was overcast, winds carrying moisture from Wheeler Lake blowing through the neighborhood. By afternoon, when Mrs. Carter went out shopping, she still saw the lights in Mr. Zellman's house on. By evening, those lights were still burning. In the otherwise quiet neighborhood, that became unusual. Around 8 o'clock that evening, Arthur's nephew, Jack Zellman, drove over to visit. The front door was ajar, the lock unturned. He stepped inside, called out loudly, but got no response. The house was eerily silent, only the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. On the kitchen counter, the teapot was drained dry, its bottom marked with a brown scorch line. A cup of cold tea, leaving a stained ring on the tabletop. The morning newspaper still open to the weather page. Arthur's light jacket still hung on the armchair, his house slippers neatly placed under the floor. Everything frozen in mid-motion, as if he had just stepped out for a moment and forgotten to come back. Jack walked around the house, opened the back door, looked out at the yard. No footprints on the damp soil. The Caprice was no longer in the garage, the spare key still in the cabinet drawer. On the porch, the light bulb flickered in the wind. Mrs. Carter stood by the fence and called over, her voice worried. "He hasn't come back yet." Jack didn't answer, just looked around the brightly lit house in silence, the yellow light casting meaningless shadows on the walls. The clock hands pointed near midnight. He stepped to the landline phone, his hand trembling as he picked up the receiver. In rushed breaths, Jack told the Limestone County Police switchboard that his grandfather had disappeared. No one in the family, or at Mitchell Nursing Home, had seen Arthur Zellman since that morning. The Zellman family's missing person call was forwarded to the Limestone County Sheriff's Office. Dawn had just broken, mist still thick over Highway 20. Sergeant Donald Reeves, who was on duty that day, was the first to arrive at the scene. He stepped into the small house where Arthur lived alone, noting every detail: the desk lamp still on, the cold teacup, no signs of struggle, keys inside, door unlocked. A missing person report was filed, and from there the search began. The Waterway Patrol team along with local police combed the area around Wheeler Lake, where the waters connected to the Tennessee River and small tributaries flowing into Piney Creek Landing. It was low-lying terrain, full of bushes and gentle slopes, also a place where locals often launched boats. If there was an accident, this was the most likely spot. They brought topographic maps, marking every boat dock, every bend in the riverside road. While wading down to the gravel beach at the water's edge, an officer spotted 2 parallel fresh tire tracks imprinted on the damp ground. The tire marks dug deep, stopping abruptly right at the slope's edge, no signs of breaking. The soil sample still wet, the mud soft, indicating the vehicle had been there not long ago. They cordoned off the area, strung up reflective tape, and called in the rescue team. A small rubber boat was launched, divers plunging into the cold, murky water. Visibility under the lake surface was nearly zero, just mud and rotten branches. After more than an hour of searching, they only pulled up a few pieces of old metal, no traces of a sunken vehicle. On the shore, curious locals stood watching, exchanging quiet murmurs. Meanwhile, police interviewed those who knew Arthur. Mrs. Mabel Carter, the neighbor, said he was still cheerful, just worried about his wife at the nursing home. No one saw any signs of despair or suicidal intent. A nurse at Mitchell recounted that he visited his wife, gave them an envelope of money, and instructed them to take good care. He said he'd be back early next week. The accounts all made the suicide hypothesis hard to believe, but police found no other evidence. As the search dragged on, rumors began to surface. Some said they saw the silver car heading toward Wilson Dam, others insisted they spotted him sitting with a strange woman. Police verified them all, and they were wrong. A car of the same color but different plates belonging to a nearby resident. The woman turned out to be just a delivery worker. Still, those stories spread throughout the town, even making the local paper with vague headlines: Decatur man vanishes after visiting ailing wife. The small community began to divide. Some believed it was an accident, others thought he had left to avoid watching the woman he loved fade away. Police continued scouring for a few more days around Piney Creek and the tributaries leading into Wheeler Lake. Each search ended in disappointment. They even brought in tracking dogs, but the riverbank scents were too muddled, only stopping at the tire track area. When the water rose high, the rescue team had to pull back. No body, no car, no signs of violence whatsoever. Everything boiled down to hypothesis: Arthur might have driven into the water in a moment of despair. The Zellman family didn't believe it. Jack, the nephew, insisted his grandfather would never leave his wife. He tried to convince police to expand the search radius, but the budget was exhausted, the rescue team down to a skeleton crew. The investigation gradually turned into administrative procedure: missing person report, preliminary closing memo, file archived in a drawer. Arthur's house remained temporarily sealed, the porch light still on every evening. Time passed, the boat landing returned to quiet. The tire tracks faded after a few rains. The water kept flowing, cold and thick with mud, swallowing every trace. Sheriff Reeves noted briefly in his final report: no victim or vehicle located. Provisional assumption: voluntary disappearance or suicide. In a place like Decatur, where everyone knew each other, that file was little more than a consolation rather than a real conclusion. But for the Zellman family, the river's silence was never an answer. After days of fruitless searching around Wheeler Lake, police returned to Arthur Zellman's house for one final thorough sweep of the scene. They wanted to ensure nothing was overlooked, no matter how small the detail. The house sat at the end of a dirt road, separated from the others by a low wooden fence. The porch light was still on, its yellow glow casting a dim light over the steps and the wooden chair where he used to sit reading the afternoon paper. No signs of forced entry, but the front door lock was worn, possibly easily opened with a common key. Inside, everything was unnaturally tidy. On the living room table, stacks of papers were neatly arranged: savings book, bank statements, old passport, children's birth certificates, and a copy of an outdated will. Not a single sheet crumpled, no signs of rummaging. On the table corner, a ballpoint pen placed parallel to the paper edge. Everything lined up, as if the owner had prepared for someone to review it after he left. But no one in the family ever mentioned him planning to move or leave town. In the bedroom, the bed was made neatly, blankets folded squarely, the wardrobe still full of his clothes, shirts, khakis, a few pairs of pajamas stacked orderly. On the nightstand, police discovered a folded sheet of paper, inside an unfinished letter to his daughter. The handwriting shaky, the last line stopping mid-sentence, "Don't let it," then trailing off. No farewell, no desperate thoughts. The paper wasn't smudged, indicating he wrote it before leaving home. Next to it was an unsealed white envelope, no recipient address. Sheriff Reeves read through it all, then placed the letter back on the table. He admitted that the more he looked around, the more unnatural it felt. Someone planning suicide rarely left such an orderly scene. No suicide note, no signs of haste, no clues pointing to a direction. On the walls, photo frames hung in perfect rows: wedding photo, daughter's photo, couple's vacation shot in Tennessee. All dust-free, as if wiped clean just a day prior. In the kitchen, the drained teapot still sat on the stove, its bottom scorched. The cold teacup, and the morning newspaper from the day he vanished, still open to the weather page. Police photographed every detail, then went down to check the backyard shed. The wooden door opened heavily, inside piled with old tools, saws, nails, dried paint cans, toolbox. In the shed corner, they found a rusty hammer mixed in with the wood scraps. The hammer head had a dent, the handle wrapped in silver duct tape. No blood stains, but police still seized it as evidence. They figured Arthur might have used it for repairs, or perhaps something he carried and forgot. Nothing confirmed it. Jack Zellman was present during that house search. He stood silently in the living room as police gathered the papers. The light reflected off the glass frame of his grandparents' photo, making Eleanor's eyes seem to stare straight toward the door. Jack said his grandfather was very meticulous, but never arranged papers like that. He never mentioned rewriting the will, he said. If he was preparing to leave, he would have told us. Police didn't respond. To them it was all just emotional speculation. Reeves noted in his report, "Scene clean, no signs of struggle or theft. Property intact. No motive for departure identified." However, in an internal meeting, he admitted to colleagues that something felt too perfect. A house with a missing person rarely this tidy. Everything left in a way that made people believe it was deliberate, or someone had staged it to create that impression. Before leaving the scene, Reeves circled the yard. Dusk was falling, streetlight glow faintly on the wooden walls. Under the porch, the rocking chair swayed lightly in the wind. The shed door not fully closed, a gap revealing the pitch-black interior. He paused, looked around, then pulled the door shut, a vague unease rising without knowing why. As the police car drove away from that small road, only the brightly lit house stood silent in the night, orderly to a suspicious degree, as if someone had set up a stage and walked off mid-performance, leaving the audience confused whether the play had ended or not. After the police finished searching the house, they began digging deeper into Arthur Zellman's relatives. His family wasn't large, but it was split into several small branches living scattered around Decatur and Athens. The main representative working with the police was Jack Zellman, his eldest nephew, over 30 years old, an electrical engineer in Athens. Jack grew up in his grandfather's house, closer to Arthur than to his own parents. He knew him as a calm, cautious man who never left anything half done. When the police suspected suicide, Jack objected vehemently. Ruth Fisher, Jack's cousin, was the youngest daughter of the family's second son, now an intern nurse in Huntsville. Upon hearing the news of his disappearance, she returned immediately. Ruth was gentle but determined, always trying to keep peace among the members. However, she also felt something off in the way everyone talked about the incident. Too many hypotheses, too few facts. The Zellman family had a long history of conflicts. Arthur had once had 2 sons. The eldest, Jack's father, died young in a work accident. The second was Helen Zellman, Ruth's mother. Helen had married Raymond Hollis, a Baptist pastor in Athens. That marriage was the source of all the rifts. Arthur disliked Hollis, considering him a sanctimonious hypocrite with ambitions to seize the family land to expand the church. The arguments between the two had been fierce, to the point where Arthur declared Hollis banned from the door. Afterward, Helen divorced and cut off contact, but the crack in the Zellman family was never mended. When the police asked if anyone in the family might be involved, Jack didn't hesitate. Only one person ever really had a grudge against him, Raymond Hollis. Sheriff Reeves noted the statement, but had no basis to act. In Athens, Hollis was a respected man, pastor to a large community, frequently appearing on radio prayer broadcasts. The idea that someone like that could be involved in a crime sounded absurd to many. The atmosphere between the Zellman and Hollis families grew heavy. The rare family gatherings took place in silence. One side blamed the other. Rumors spread outward, some saying Arthur had committed suicide, others whispering that he'd fled due to property disputes. The police just listened and took notes. No one found new evidence. Jack and Ruth grew more desperate. They went around asking neighbors, stopping at gas stations along the road, seeing if anyone had seen Arthur that day. But the answer was always no. In a conversation with Mabel Carter, Arthur's neighbor, Jack heard a detail that puzzled him. A few days before disappearing, Arthur had received a letter in a brown envelope with no sender's name. After that day, she hadn't seen the letter anymore. They searched thoroughly, but there were no strange papers left in the house. That small detail wasn't enough for the police to take notice, but to Jack, it was like a lost piece in an underlit puzzle. Meanwhile, in Athens, Pastor Hollis continued preaching, as if nothing had happened. He spoke of loss and forgiveness, praised by his congregation as a man of faith, but a few in the community began whispering on the very day Arthur disappeared. Hollis had borrowed the church's brown Ford, absent for nearly the entire afternoon. When Jack heard this, he shuddered, but he knew no one would believe him based on speculation alone. In a small southern town, going against a pastor was unthinkable. In the weeks that followed, the Zellman family gradually closed itself off. Arthur's house was locked, the porch light still on every evening like an unconscious habit. Jack and Ruth rarely spoke, each carrying their own private suspicions. During church services, Hollis sometimes mentioned a lost man in need of the Lord's guidance, making both of them shiver. No one dared confront him directly, but the feeling of suspicion crept into every meal, every phone call. Time passed, and Arthur Zellman's disappearance gradually became a taboo topic in the family. Whenever someone brought it up, the elders just shook their heads and said, "Don't stir up old stories." For Jack and Ruth, that silence only amplified their unease. They didn't know that those very conflicts and suspicions would cause this mystery to be buried for over 4 decades, until what remained of their grandfather was found beneath the cold mud of Wheeler Lake. When the search around Wheeler Lake ended without results, rumors began spreading quickly throughout Decatur. In a small town, a single word was enough to turn into a story. A truck driver named Harold Boone claimed he'd seen Arthur's silver car parked near the Wilson Dam area. He insisted he remembered the license plate had 2 8s. The police immediately went to the scene, but that car was an old Oldsmobile belonging to a construction worker, completely unrelated. False information, but the story still spread. A local newspaper ran a sensational headline, Man missing after visiting sick wife. Car seen near Wilson Dam. Just one word, seen, was enough to make the public believe the police were close to finding the missing caprice. Before that news could even settle, new stories emerged. One witness said he'd seen Arthur sitting with a blonde woman in a car, heading north. Another recounted seeing the two stop at a gas station and then vanish. No one had photos or specific evidence, but the accounts kept piling up. Soon the press had more fodder. Regional papers in Huntsville and Florence all ran elderly man may have run away with companion. Even though it was based on unverified sources, the articles were enough to change the whole town's perspective. Arthur was no longer a missing person, he became a runaway. The Zellman family was outraged. Jack read the article and was so furious he could barely speak. He knew his grandfather had never had anyone else besides Eleanor. Ruth went to the newspaper office, demanding a correction, but her words were cut short in the follow-up piece, reduced to a vague line, "Family does not rule out possibility." He left voluntarily. From then on, people started looking at the case differently. In coffee shops, they whispered, maybe he couldn't stand his sick wife anymore. The police felt the pressure too. They held a brief press conference, stating there was no evidence of a woman companion, but the rumors had taken root. Many added imagined details, that Arthur had withdrawn money before disappearing, that he was depressed, that his wife wasn't really that critical. Those scattered pieces combined into a complete story, a weary man leaving everything behind to start over somewhere else. Public opinion began believing that scenario more than the accident hypothesis. The media even ran an op-ed titled, "When Love Makes One Choose to Leave." Under media pressure, the police had to verify all the witnesses. They interviewed everyone who claimed to have seen him with a woman, but no one remembered the license plate or exact time. Some admitted just hearsay. Each report ended with the phrase "insufficient information to verify." As the file thickened, the investigation veered off course. Sergeant Reeves noted in the minutes, "No concrete evidence supports the runaway hypothesis," but that note was never made public. For the Zellman family, faith in the police began to crumble. Jack went to the station demanding to review the file, but was refused. He realized they'd quietly classified the case as voluntary disappearance. Ruth tried to stay calm, sending a letter to the state sheriff's office hoping for support. The only response was a cold memo. Insufficient criminal elements. All efforts fell into silence. In Athens, Pastor Raymond Hollis made no direct statements, but in his Sunday sermon, he spoke of those who leave home for peace. To Jack it felt like a vicious insinuation. He knew Hollis had a grudge against his grandfather, but he couldn't accuse him publicly without evidence. In the community's eyes, Hollis remained a man of faith, while the Zellman family bore the stigma of hiding something. Spring passed, and the rumors didn't stop. The press moved on to other stories. The police stopped updating information. In Arthur's house, the porch light still shone every night like a silent reminder. Jack often drove by, just standing at the gate, looking at the quiet house, feeling like all the answers were buried somewhere deep under the lake. In his heart, a different truth was forming, that his grandfather hadn't left willingly, and someone had made it happen. But at that point, no one wanted to listen anymore. As the hypotheses about Arthur Zellman's disappearance gradually ran dry, the police stopped searching, the press no longer mentioned it, and public interest quickly faded. It was then that a woman calling herself Linda Harrow, a psychic from Huntsville, contacted Jack Zellman. Her voice was soft but firm, saying that in a dream she'd seen a car submerged under a pile of scrap iron along the Tennessee River, near the Wheeler Lake area. The car was swallowed by water, buried in mud and scrap, Linda said, and his spirit is still there. Her confident manner made Jack hesitate. Many had exploited the case for fame, but Linda knew details never publicized: the old baseball cap, the brown leather pouch, and even how Arthur often sat fishing at Piney Creek. Ruth urged Jack to try, since the police were no longer keen on the file. After a few calls, Sergeant Reeves agreed to send a small team with the Zellman family to check the area Linda indicated. They arrived at a curving stretch of riverbank, where old cars had once been used to reinforce against erosion. The dirt road led down a slope full of mud. The Tennessee's waters that day were murky, reeking of rust and algae. Reeves didn't believe in the supernatural, but he quietly observed, as the rescue team lowered the boat. They used iron hooks and cables to drag around the area. One by one, rusted frames were hauled up from the water, covered in moss and flaking metal. Each time the cable tightened, Jack held his breath, hoping then disappointed. After more than 2 hours, only scrap cars were salvaged. No caprice, no evidence, no trace. Ruth sat watching the water, whispering, maybe she was just making it up. Reeves thought so too, but he still had the results documented to avoid backlash. As the group prepared to leave, a rescue worker spotted an old cloth cap caught in tree roots near the bank. Beige color, frayed brim, the kind Arthur often wore. Jack picked it up, hands trembling as he looked at the embroidered label, Zell still remaining. The whole group fell silent. Ruth murmured, it could be his. Reeves had the cap sealed and sent for testing. A few days later, the results came back. The cap belonged to a fisherman missing since 1979. The hope that had just flickered went out. The psychic story quickly spread across the region. The local paper ran, "Psychic joined search for missing man, no results." Some believed Linda really saw spirits, others mocked her, saying she was just exploiting the family's tragedy. Linda went on local TV, declaring the energy at Wheeler Lake is still strong, thrusting the case back into superstition and skepticism. After that, dozens of others claiming special abilities started sending letters to Jack, each pointing in a different direction. One said the car was near Wilson Dam, another insisted he was buried in the woods. Jack stopped responding. He knew if he kept listening, they'd be stuck in futile hope forever. Ruth cut off contact with the press, not wanting to see her grandfather's name mentioned as a mystical topic. The Decatur community gradually lost interest. From a shocking disappearance, the story became coffee shop gossip. Some said Arthur had driven into the water to find his wife, others that he'd left town out of shame. No one knew what was real anymore. When the case yielded no results, it was swallowed by the local imagination. To them, the name Arthur Zellman gradually turned into a riverside legend, the story of the man who vanished with his silver car. The Zellman family nearly gave up. They received no more updates from the police. Arthur's house remained locked, the porch light still on every night, as a silent reminder. Jack occasionally drove past Wheeler Lake, stopping at the riverbank to gaze down at the murky water. There the Tennessee River still flowed slow and heavy, carrying fine mud that covered everything beneath. In the golden afternoon light, it looked peacefully eerie, as if it had swallowed the answers everyone had stopped seeking. By the end of summer, the disappearance file was shifted to inactive status. No more press releases, no more questions. The stories about the psychic, the cap and the scrap cars were quickly forgotten, existing only in a few small clips on old newspaper pages. From then on, the Arthur Zellman case officially slipped from the town's memory, lying dormant in the darkness, like the Tennessee's waters themselves, where people once believed he was waiting to be found. When the final search efforts yielded no results, Arthur Zellman's disappearance quietly slipped from every news bulletin. No one mentioned it anymore. No rescue teams returned to Wheeler Lake. By 1985, after more than 3 years without additional evidence, the Limestone County Sheriff's Office officially closed the file, labeling it in red, "Cold Case, unsolved." The file folder, less than half an inch thick, contained only a few black and white photos, witness statements, and Sergeant Reeves' final report: no body, vehicle, or evidence of foul play found. Presumed missing under undetermined circumstances. That same year, Eleanor Zellman, the wife Arthur had cared for during her final months, passed away in the Mitchell nursing home. She was buried in Green Hill Cemetery, In the plot the couple had purchased in advance, for when we go to the Lord. But Arthur's grave beside hers remained empty. The double headstone bore only his name, no date of death. Locals passing by would whisper, "No one knows where he is yet." For the Zellman family, that emptiness was an unhealing wound. Helen Zellman, Arthur's daughter, moved away from Alabama after her mother's death. She took her 2 young children to live with relatives in Tennessee, leaving no exact address. Helen refused all interviews, unwilling to relive the time tormented by public opinion and vicious rumors. In her eyes, Alabama was where the family had been buried. When she left, she entrusted all the paperwork, assets, and the small house to Jack to manage. Jack became the only one still clinging to the case. Every year he sent letters to police agencies, enclosing copies of the old file, requesting the investigation be reopened. First to the Alabama State Police, then to the FBI. All responded with curt form letters, no legal basis to reinvestigate the matter. Each new letter from Jack was pinned to the old file, thickening it over the years. He didn't give up, but he no longer held much hope. Every spring he would visit to light incense at his grandmother's grave, then gaze at the empty headstone beside it, feeling both close and distant. Meanwhile, the town of Decatur changed day by day. The old houses along Old Highway 20 were sold off one by one, new residents moving in who knew nothing of the old stories. The Piney Creek area was leveled to build a boat ramp. Only Arthur's house still stood unchanged, its roof tiles faded to silver, the porch light broken long ago. Whenever people passed by, they still joked that Mr. Zellman's house is haunted, because every night the windows reflected the moonlight, as if someone were inside. To Jack, it wasn't a ghost, but memories he couldn't leave behind. Sergeant Reeves, who had led the investigation, retired in the late 1980s. Before leaving his post, he transferred the entire old file to the basement storage of the police station, where it joined thousands of unsolved cases. The Zellman file sat in bin number 43, among others labeled, "Missing Person." As he placed it down, Reeves paused for a moment. He had once thought the case simple, a grieving elderly man with a sick wife. But over time, he grew uneasy about the unnatural tidiness of the house and the forgotten rusty hammer. Still, there was no evidence to hold on to. He simply closed the file and added a final note, awaiting new evidence, but no new evidence appeared. The new officers who replaced Reeves remembered few names like Arthur Zellman's. In briefings, the case was mentioned only as a textbook example of undetermined disappearance. Sometimes, young recruits in the unit would stumble upon the name and ask, "Who was Zellman?" and get the reply, "An old case that went nowhere." Jack persisted. He sent letters, made calls, even met with reporters, but no one was still interested in a story over 10 years old. The last article on the case appeared on page 4 of the Decatur Daily, under a small headline, "Family Still Seeks Answers in 1982 Disappearance." The accompanying photo showed Jack standing in front of the old house, his shadow stretching long across the weathered wall. The article ended with, "A disappearance even time doesn't want to touch." By the late 1990s, Jack started a family and moved permanently to Birmingham. Every year he still drove back to Wheeler Lake once, standing to watch the water flow. He told his son that down there, his grandfather might still be lying somewhere in the deep mud. The boy, still young then, asked if he's still there, "Why doesn't anyone go look anymore?" Jack just fell silent. That question had no answer. The Arthur Zellman file still lay quietly in the steel cabinet, dust blurring the label. Every time an archivist opened the storage room door, light spilled in, illuminating the yellowed papers, the faded print nearly gone. Amid thousands of forgotten cases, that file was just a meaningless stack of papers, waiting for a patient pair of hands to open it again. And for nearly 40 years after, no one touched it. Arthur Zellman's disappearance officially became the past, a name sunk in silence, existing only in the memories of those who once knew him. And in the hazy waters of Wheeler Lake, where the river continued to flow past everything, including justice. 42 years after Arthur Zellman vanished, the case seemed buried forever. Early in 2024, Lieutenant Megan Carver of the Alabama State Police Cold Case Division was assigned to review old missing persons files. When she opened the thin folder labeled, Zellman, Arthur, Missing 1982, she immediately took notice. It contained only a few blurry photos, a short report, and a dry assessment. No body or vehicle found, possibility of voluntary departure. But what made her pause were the odd details. The tidy house, papers neatly arranged, an unfinished letter, a rusty hammer never tested. With years of experience investigating staged scenes, Carver felt this wasn't a suicide, but a setup. She presented her assessment to her superiors and got approval to reopen the file under the Unsolved Alabama program, a project applying modern technology to cold cases. Carver began cross-referencing old geographic data and reconstructing the route from Arthur's house to the Mitchell nursing home. Comparing the 1982 maps with new satellite images, she discovered that Piney Creek Landing, where tire tracks were noted in the old report, had been redeveloped into a tourist boat dock. She noted possibility of artifacts buried under mud or displaced by current. To survey underwater, Carver reached out to the civilian dive team Deepwater Search Alabama, led by Jared Mays, a former Navy diver. The group had cracked many long-term disappearances using 3D sonar tech. After hearing the description, Mays agreed right away. If there's anything left in Wheeler Lake, we'll see it. She and Mays settled on a plan to scan the entire lake bed within a 5-mile radius around the old Piney Creek dock, where the Tennessee River formed a natural deep hole. News of the reinvestigation quickly reached Jack Zellman, now 67. When he received the invitation to collaborate, he was silent for a long time. After all these years, he hadn't expected anyone to remember his grandfather. Jack drove back to Decatur, standing in front of the faded old house. Weeds overgrew the path, the Zellman sign half fallen off. He touched the door frame, feeling all the old memories flood back. When he met Carver, he said just one thing: if you really want to find him, I'll help. Carver reviewed all the old statements, especially the details the 1982 police had overlooked. The rusty hammer, the unfinished letter, and the house's tidiness gave her the sense of deliberate staging. People only clean like that when they know someone's coming to look, she told Jack. He nodded, eyes sad. I thought the same 40 years ago, but no one believed me. A few days later, the Deepwater search team brought their equipment to Wheeler Lake. They used sonar to scan strips of water, spiraling out from the shore to the river's center. The sonar screen showed faint glowing streaks, logs, scrap metal, sunken rocks. Near the deep hole to the east, the machine picked up a block longer than 16 feet, tilted under the mud. Mays marked the coordinates, saying, could be a car, could be an old bridge piece, but it's too big to ignore. They headed back, planning a dive check once the weather stabilized. That evening, Carver reviewed the collected data. In the center of the screen was a hazy image of a metal mass, 2 parallel voids, suggesting car windows. She printed the photo, placing it beside the 1982 report on tire tracks at Piney Creek. The coordinates matched almost exactly. A chill ran down her spine, and Carver noted in her log, high probability of detecting the missing vehicle. Recommend direct survey. The next day she met Jack again by the lake shore. The sky was overcast, the water flat like a gray mirror. Jack stood silently gazing into the distance, where the Tennessee River curved. I've dreamed of him here so many times, he said. Carver replied, your dream might be about to come true. They both looked toward the water, where small waves lapped at the damp sand. As she left the scene, Carver felt that familiar sensation only investigators understand, the intuition that she was about to touch a secret buried too long. After 40 years of being forgotten, Arthur Zellman's disappearance had hope for the first time. Wheeler Lake remained as silent as ever, but this time, beneath that water, justice was being called awake. Morning mist shrouded the surface of Wheeler Lake. The Deepwater Search Alabama boat quietly left the dock, carrying Lieutenant Megan Carver, Jared Mays, the dive team leader, and Jack Zellman. This was the first sonar scan since Arthur Zellman's disappearance had been reopened. No one said much, just the hum of the engine, and the steady ping of the sonar, echoing in the quiet space. The screen displayed faint green streaks, the first images of the lake bed after 40 years. They started at the Piney Creek landing area, where the 1982 file had noted suspicious tire tracks. Mays piloted the boat slowly along the shoreline, eyes glued to the screen. 25 feet deep, soft mud bottom, he said. If the Caprice went in here, it'd sink fast. Carver took notes, while Jack just stared, hands gripping the seat arms tight. For him, each sonar signal was a heartbeat of hope. The screen kept showing odd bright blocks, tree stumps, boulders, metal scraps. Just industrial junk, Mays said, tweaking the scan frequency. A moment later, they caught a fairly even rectangle, size matching a car body. The group held their breath, but as it zoomed in, the image clarified. It was just an industrial trash bin dumped in the water. Hope flickered out. In the hours that followed, they spotted a few more objects, but all were junked cars, steel frames, and sunken logs. Once the sonar picked up a shape like a sedan. After dropping the camera, they found it was a 1950s Ford truck swept away by flood. Nothing connected to Arthur. Around noon, wind picked up, rippling the surface. The group pulled into a small sandy cove to rest. Carver spread out the map, marking scanned areas, most barren. If it's not at Piney Creek, maybe the current carried it farther. Mays said, pointing east. That area's got cliffs, and a deep hole, strongest flow there. Carver recalled from the old report, Sergeant Reeves had noted, hazardous area, inaccessible to rescue boats. Back then, tech wasn't advanced enough to check it. She looked at the map and nodded, let's try there. In the afternoon, they steered the boat toward the eastern cliffs of Wheeler Lake. The landscape shifted dramatically, sheer dark rock faces on both sides, sparse trees clinging. If he took a wrong turn at night, one wheel slip, and it'd go straight down. Mays said. Jack stayed silent. In his mind, the image of the silver car vanishing into the fog, a scene he'd dreamed 100 times. Sonar began scanning at over 30 feet deep. Streaks raced across the screen, then halted. Stop here, Mays signaled. A 16-foot block with rounded corners appeared clearly on the map. That could be a car, he said. Carver leaned in, a hazy metal frame, two parallel gaps like windows. She felt like she was seeing Arthur's Caprice lying still in the dark. Mark the coordinates, she whispered. They dropped the camera down, but the murky water limited visibility to a few feet. The screen showed thick mud, laced with rotten branches. Mays tilted the camera, and an image flashed, a curved metal piece, possibly a car frame, then vanished. Not clear enough, he said. We need pro divers and stronger lights. Carver agreed. She knew they'd just brushed something, but it wasn't confirmation yet. As dusk fell, they returned to the dock. Carver glanced back, the lake still mirror calm, no sign of what lay below. On the way in, no one spoke. Mays held the wheel. Jack stared at the trailing water like he feared losing the trail. If there's really a car down there, he said softly. My grandfather's been waiting 40 years. Back at the dock, Carver sent her report to headquarters right away. Initial sonar results detected vehicle-shaped metal object at coordinates 34.651, in 8, 7.012, W, depth 31 feet, recommend expanded survey of eastern cliff area. She sat alone at the table, reviewing the sonar image again. The hazy rectangle in the lake bed seemed to stare back at her. It could be the Caprice, or just a rock formation. But in her gut, the hunch was clearer than ever. The truth was right under that water, just waiting to be pulled up. Outside, night wind blew across Wheeler Lake, carrying chill from the Tennessee River. Carver stepped onto the porch, gazing at the dark water. Somewhere down there, the secret the whole town had forgotten, was waiting to be awakened. She knew they'd return tomorrow, with a different resolve. Either find the car, or find justice for Arthur Zellman. 2 days after the first sweep, the Deepwater Search Alabama team returned to Wheeler Lake with stronger equipment, high-powered sonar, high-pressure dive lights, and a floating crane. Lieutenant Megan Carver supervised from the shore, while Jared Mays and 2 divers went into the water, heading toward the marked coordinates, where the sonar had detected a metal object over 16 feet long, buried deep nearly 28 feet under the mud. The lake surface was flat calm, with light winds and no other boats around. "If there's a car here, it's right there," Mays said. The sonar pinged steadily, then abruptly stopped. On the screen, the rectangular object came into clear view: curved roof, flat rear, dimensions matching a sedan's body exactly. "Bingo," Mays whispered. They dropped a buoy to mark it and began the dive. The water was cold and murky, visibility no more than 2 feet. After several minutes of groping around, the flashlight beam hit a metal surface covered in green moss, the car's roof, the silver paint still faintly shimmering underwater. "Got it," Mays reported over the comms, his voice choked. "Windshield intact, but rear glass shattered from the outside in." The team hurriedly looped cables around the frame, attaching hooks to the floating crane. The engine roared, the water churning into foam as the metal mass slowly rose. Mud streamed off in rivulets, revealing the weathered body caked in moss and sand. When sunlight glinted off the grill, Jack Zellman gasped, his grandfather's 1979 silver Chevy Caprice. The Chevrolet logo was still intact, and the rusted rear license plate was legible, 4D7829, matching the 1982 registration records perfectly. As the car was hauled onto the sandy shore, everyone fell silent. Carver stood nearby, her eyes fixed on the vehicle. It was no longer rumor or hypothesis. This was the first real evidence of the case. The driver's door was jammed shut, requiring hydraulic shears to pry it open. When it popped free, the stench of mud and metal rushed out. Inside, the leather seats were rotted, the dashboard coated in sand, but the glove compartment was intact. Carver carefully opened it. A brown leather wallet lay inside. She flipped it open to find a driver's license in Arthur Zellman's name. The portrait photo faded, along with a few silver coins. On the passenger seat, a pair of silver-framed glasses with one lens shattered lay face down, and beneath the floor mat was an unopened envelope from First Decatur Bank, stamped for deposit only. Everything went into evidence bags. No body, just a few small bone fragments and scraps of torn fabric, likely washed away long ago by the current. But Carver knew no body was needed. The car alone was enough to change the entire case. Upon closer inspection of the rear, Mays pointed to a deep dent in the trunk lid, aligning with the shattered glass position. The metal was deeply concave, edges folded inward. "Impact from the outside," he said. "Couldn't be water pressure." Carver shone her light, nodding. "Right direction of force, someone pushed it, or struck it with something hard." A chill ran down her spine. The intuition she'd felt from the start now had concrete shape. Carver ordered crime scene photos, samples of mud, paint, and shattered glass collected. Everything was sealed and sent to the Alabama State Lab for DNA testing and impact timeline analysis. She instructed the technicians to preserve the entire vehicle in a sealed warehouse to prevent further oxidation. Jack stood motionless by the shore, watching the silver Caprice tilt in the sunset light. Memories flooded back, the engine rumble as his grandfather left that morning, the cold tea on the table, the porch light still on. After all those years, the question "where did he go?" finally had an answer: Wheeler Lake. That afternoon, with the work complete, the crane lowered the car onto a flatbed trailer for transport to the forensics center. Carver peeled off her gloves, taking a deep breath. Mud still clung to her wrists, but she didn't notice. 40 years, and finally, he's brought up from the water, she whispered. Jack replied, "Not the end, it's the beginning." He stared at the dent in the trunk, his gaze shifting from grief to anger. On the drive back, Carver flipped through Sergeant Reeves' old file. The final note, awaiting new evidence, suddenly haunted her. She murmured, "Here it is." She knew the next step wasn't just restoring Arthur Zellman's honor, but investigating who had caused his death. As the transport truck pulled away from the lake, the sun dipped fully behind the tree line. The water turned pitch black, reflecting the flashing red police lights. Jack stood alone, watching the dirt road lead out of Wheeler Lake. His grandfather had been found, but whoever pushed that car into the water was still out there, hiding amid Alabama's quiet decades. Carver turned the car around, watching the lake recede in the rearview mirror. "I don't think he left willingly," she said. Jack only whispered, "I know." 40 years of waiting ended in a heavy afternoon, when the 1979 Chevy Caprice was pulled from the water, worn, rusted, but carrying the truth the whole town had forgotten. And for Carver, Wheeler Lake was no longer a serene body of water, but a crime scene buried for 4 decades. The 1979 Chevy Caprice was transported to the Alabama State Forensics Lab in Montgomery. Lieutenant Megan Carver was there from early morning, observing as technicians disassembled parts, sifting samples of mud and metal. Under the driver's seat frame, they found a small, dark, brittle bone fragment, only a few centimeters long. At first, everyone thought it was animal bone, but Carver ordered DNA analysis using the latest amplification techniques, something impossible in 1982. The results left the team speechless. The DNA matched Jack Zellman's sample perfectly, his only surviving grandson. The fragment belonged to Arthur Zellman. After 42 years, he was officially confirmed dead. Jack sat still, his hands trembling as he held the report. "At least now he's found," he said. Carver only nodded, and someone didn't want us to know that. The forensics room continued a thorough interior examination. The driver's side floor showed a deep indentation in the steel frame, and a crack in the steering column, signs of a major rear impact. Force modeling analysis indicated Arthur suffered severe head trauma before the car sank, meaning he was dead or unconscious when it hit the water. The forensics report stated clearly, no evidence the victim was alive upon vehicle contact with water. Thus it couldn't be suicide. At the rear door edge, the techs found a streak of dark brown paint layered over the car's silver, well preserved by the mud seal. Spectrographic analysis confirmed it was paint from a 1980 brown Ford LTD, a common model in the South in the early 80s. Carver cross-referenced 1982 vehicle registrations in the area. The old DMV database showed only 3 brown Ford owners in Limestone County at the time. When Raymond Hollis's name appeared on the list, Carver nearly held her breath. Hollis had been a Baptist pastor in Athens, and the ex-husband of Helen Zellman, Arthur's daughter. Records showed he owned a dark brown 1980 Ford LTD, plate 3H2 461, transferred to a church parishioner in 1986. Carver obtained old insurance files, finding a 1983 photo of the vehicle matching the color and details exactly. Comparing the paint sample from the Caprice door to the original Ford sample yielded a 98% match. "No doubt," the specialist said. Carver stayed silent, knowing the key piece had fallen into place. She continued scrutinizing the bank envelope recovered from the car floor. It bore a faint thumbprint, not matching Arthur's. The edge showed an old scar on the thumb. Carver checked Hollis's background file. Before becoming a pastor, he'd been a carpenter, injuring his right thumb in 1974. A small detail, but an eerie match. The scattered evidence now linked into a chain: head trauma, rear force, brown paint, Hollis. Carver revisited the 1982 statements and found a forgotten line. A gas station attendant in Athens had seen Hollis driving a brown car the morning Arthur disappeared, asking directions to Piney Creek. Police had dismissed it then as church business. Now that statement became the final piece. Carver compiled it all into a report for the state prosecutor. DNA confirms victim as Arthur Zellman. Death by head trauma prior to vehicle submersion. Foreign paint matches 1980 dark brown Ford Ltd. Hollis is the only relevant party owning such a vehicle. The prosecutor read it and said simply, "Find direct evidence. If you do, we'll issue an arrest warrant." That night, Carver drove to Athens, stopping in front of the old Baptist church where Hollis had preached. The weathered wooden sign still bore his name, Reverend R. Hollis, 1975, 1990. Carver stood there a long time, her mind replaying it. Arthur leaving the nursing home, Hollis blocking the road, an argument, the rear impact, and the Caprice shoved straight into the water. The scene replayed vividly, like a slow-motion film. The next morning, she called Jack. "Forensics are clear," Carver said. "Not an accident, your grandfather was attacked." On the other end Jack was silent, then whispered, "It was him, wasn't it?" Carver didn't answer right away. She knew to keep everything by the book, but the look in Jack's eyes, between pain and release, told her he'd known the answer for a long time. The final report closed with Carver's line, "Arthur Zellman's death shows signs of homicide. Paint traces and impact structure indicate involvement of a second vehicle. Recommend opening criminal investigation phase. Suspect Raymond Hollis." As she signed it, Carver looked up at the photo of the silver Caprice stored in the warehouse. The car lay there, still, but every patch of mud and fleck of paint had told the story humans had hidden for 40 years. Outside, Wheeler Lake remained serene as if nothing had ever happened, but for Carver and Jack, that water was no longer a symbol of silence. It was a mirror reflecting sins buried too long. After forensics confirmed Arthur Zellman's murder, Lieutenant Megan Carver pursued the angle 1982 police had overlooked: finances. If Raymond Hollis was the perpetrator, there had to be a clear motive. She requested Arthur's records from First Decatur Bank, where he'd deposited all his savings. The old branch was now just a dusty archive. Amid hundreds of file boxes, Carver found the folder labeled Zellman, Arthur's checking account. Typewritten statements showed routine deductions, nursing home fees, utility bills, until a line stopped her cold. Cash withdrawal of $5,000 on March 9, 1982, just 4 days after Arthur was reported missing. This transaction hadn't appeared in the old investigation file. "No one ever checked," Carver whispered. The withdrawal slip bore Arthur Zellman's signature, but the handwriting was off. Forensics confirmed it was forged, shaky strokes lacking his characteristic loops. She dug for the attached bank power of attorney, and spotted the line, "Witnessed by R. Hollis." The ink was smudged, but legible. Carver immediately recognized it as Raymond Hollis's handwriting, the Baptist pastor and ex-husband of Arthur's daughter. She tracked down Gerald Baines, the branch manager at the time, now frail and elderly. When Carver showed him an old photo of Hollis, he nodded immediately. "I remember him. Dressed like a preacher, brought the power of attorney, said he was withdrawing for his sick father-in-law. I even noted Reverend Hollis's in the log." That handwritten log entry remained. Cash paid to Reverend R. Hollis. His name sat right next to the $5,000 transaction. Carver sent the documents to handwriting forensics. Results confirmed the Arthur Zellman signature was hand-copied, while the witness R. Hollis matched Hollis's 1970 marriage records, 100%. The report concluded, "Forged power of attorney, signed by Raymond Hollis." The picture sharpened, Arthur vanished, the car pushed into the water, and just days later, Hollis hit the bank to drain the account with a fake power of attorney. Comparing the withdrawal date to Arthur's disappearance yielded exactly 4 days, too coincidental to be chance. She reviewed tax records and found that in 1982, Hollis declared a sudden spike in church donation of exactly $5,000. A way to launder the stolen cash. He used the money from the man he killed to tithe to the Lord, Carver said, her voice thick. She brought the evidence to the state prosecutor's office. The summary report read, $5,000 withdrawal occurred, post-victim disappearance. Power of attorney bears forged signature, witnessed by Raymond Hollis. Hollis received funds directly, no accompanying party. Clear financial motive, asset seizure and personal grudge. The prosecutor looked at Carver and said curtly, "Good, now find him." Hollis was 85 then, living reclusively on the outskirts of Athens. A small house at the end of a dirt road, rusted tin roof, a wooden sign on the porch still reading, "God's work never ends." Carver arrived with 2 investigators. As she introduced herself, Hollis just gave a faint smile, voice raspy. "I knew this day would come." He didn't ask why, only looked at her with weary eyes. "You found the car, didn't you?" Carver stayed silent. "And the money," she said. Hollis closed his eyes, sighing. $5,000 wasn't worth it. "But he took everything from me, home, daughter, reputation." That statement was enough for Carver to understand. The motive was an indirect confession. That evening, she wrote in her report, "Financial evidence confirms case motive. Suspect Raymond Hollis unlawfully withdrew $5,000 from victim's account via forged power of attorney, just 4 days after Mr. Zellman's disappearance. Motive of asset theft and personal vendetta clear." She closed the file, gazing out the hotel window. Alabama skies turned to rain, the old church lights reflecting on the wet pavement. Hollis had once preached on honesty and redemption, but now, all he left was sin hidden for 40 years, and a paltry sum of dirty money, enough to trade for Arthur Zellman's life. Right after the discovery of the fraudulent withdrawal announcement, Lieutenant Megan Carver received an unexpected call from an elderly man in Athens named Eddie Brooks. His voice was hoarse and trembling, but full of certainty. "I've kept quiet too long. I think I saw something in 1982 at the Piney Creek dock." Carver listened, noting every detail, sensing that this call might be the final piece. The next day, she drove with investigator Frank Lewis to Brooks' house, a small home on the banks of the Tennessee River, where he lived alone. The walls were covered with old photos, wooden boats, fishing rods, and long-ago summers. He greeted them in silence, poured coffee, then spoke. "I was a boat rental operator at Piney Creek that year. I remember that night, Arthur Zellman disappeared very clearly, because I heard something that still haunted me to this day." Brooks recounted that on that day, around 8 p.m., he was tying up the boat and stowing gear when he saw a dark brown Ford parked near the edge of the dock, headlights still on. There were 2 men standing beside it, arguing loudly, one older, wearing a gray coat, the other younger, dressed neatly like church folk. I couldn't see their faces clearly, because it was getting dark, but I could hear their voices plainly. The younger one shouted, "You won't touch me again." Then there was a loud thud, like metal hitting something hard. Carver asked, "Are you sure it was the night of March 5, 1982? Brooks nodded. "Absolutely. I remember because it was my son's 10th birthday that day, and I'd just finished camping with him." After the thud, he saw the younger man bend down, then open the silver car door, and shove something inside. "At the time I thought they were just scuffling. I was afraid to get involved, so I stayed away. When I came back, both cars were gone. Only tire tracks left, stretching to the water's edge." Hearing that, Carver felt her heart pounding. The detail of the brown Ford matched the trace paint evidence and the information about Raymond Hollis's Ford Ltd. "Would you be willing to confirm this under a formal statement?" she asked. Brooks nodded, hands shaking but eyes steady. "I've been silent for 42 years. That's enough. If speaking out helps his soul rest, I'll speak." Carver immediately took him to the local police station to record a sworn statement. When she showed him an old photo of Hollis from 1981, when he was still a pastor, Brooks stared intently and said softly, "That's him. I could never forget that walk and that hat. It was him at the dock that night." Cross-referencing old files, Carver discovered that Brooks' statement had once existed in a faint handwritten report by Sergeant Reeves in 1982, but the last line was annotated, "Witness unreliable, signs of intoxication." Perhaps because at the time, Brooks was just an ordinary boat operator, his words weren't taken seriously. And so, the most crucial lead was buried for 4 decades. Carver gripped the photocopy of the document tightly, feeling both anger and sorrow. If they'd listened back then, Arthur Zellman might have been found decades earlier. One testimony can change everything, she said to Lewis. That same day, the investigative team returned to Piney Creek Landing with Brooks to reconstruct the scene. He pointed to the southwest side of the dock, where the old dirt road was now overgrown with trees. The brown Ford was parked there, he said, and the silver car was over here, about 10 yards away. In the sunset light, Carver envisioned the scene: 2 men, 1 blow, then the sound of metal clashing, a sound that might have ended a life. Brooks paused, gazing at the vast lake before him. I heard the water part sharply, like something plunging in. Then silence, no cries, no engine, just the waves lapping. I knew something was wrong, but I was a coward. I didn't report it right away. His voice choked. Carver placed a hand on his shoulder. You've done the right thing today. That evening, when Carver returned to headquarters, she opened the Zellman file once more. Amid the yellowed pages, every detail now fit: Brooks' testimony, the brown paint traces, the dent on the car hood, and the financial evidence. The final piece had closed the circle of crime, a case where silence had protected the perpetrator for 40 years. Carver sent Brooks' statement to the state prosecutor with a note: independent witness, suspect identified from photo, detailed description matches physical evidence, recommend search warrant and arrest. As she turned off the light and looked out the window, Wheeler Lake lay flat and still under the moonlight. But in Carver's heart, that water was no longer a symbol of silence, it was a mirror, reflecting the final truth about to be brought to light. With the financial and physical evidence complete, Lieutenant Megan Carver submitted the file for a search and arrest warrant for Raymond Hollis. The state prosecutor's office approved it that very night. The next morning, a team of police coordinated with the Athens PD to execute the plan. Hollis's small house sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by old oak trees. The tin roof was rusted, and the front porch still hung with a weathered wooden sign: God's work never ends. As the police vehicles pulled up, neighbors began gathering to watch. Carver, in a bulletproof vest, holding the warrant, whispered to her team, "Move gently, he's old." The front door was unlocked. Hollis sat in a rocking chair, back slightly hunched, eyes gazing out at the porch. When he saw Carver enter, he only said softly, "I guess you found it all." Carver read the arrest warrant, voice steady. "Raymond Hollis, you are under arrest for the murder of Arthur Zellman in 1982. Hollis nodded faintly, without resistance. "Justice comes slow, but it comes in the end," he murmured, allowing 2 officers to cuff him. The search team began their work. The house was kept neat, as if he knew they were coming. In the closet, Carver found an old brown coat with silver paint specks on the left sleeve, matching the Chevy Caprice's color exactly. In the backyard shed, they recovered a rusty wooden-handled hammer, its head dented and scratched in a way that matched the forensic description of the injury on Arthur's skull. Carver stood silently looking at it, a chill running down her spine. "This is the murder weapon," she said quietly. As Hollis was led out of the house, the blue and red lights of the police cars lit up the entire road. Neighbors clustered on both sides, many in shock. "It can't be," one woman shook her head. "He was my pastor for 30 years. Another man replied, "We've been praying for a murderer." Camera flashes went off as reporters arrived, capturing the image of the silver-haired pastor with his head bowed, hands cuffed. News of Pastor Raymond Hollis's arrest in the 1982 murder spread through Athens in just hours. Local TV stations aired it non-stop: former pastor arrested in 42-year-old cold case. Footage of the elderly man, being escorted to the police car, became the afternoon's focal point. Many congregants couldn't believe it. Some wept. Others went to the church to pray for the wayward shepherd. The old Baptist church was sealed off for investigation, its iron gates closed amid hundreds of stunned gazes. At the Athens police station, Hollis didn't request a lawyer, only asking for a cup of coffee. In the interrogation room, he spoke slowly, voice hoarse, Arthur never forgave me. He took everything: house, daughter, honor. I just wanted him to know what loss felt like." Carver replied, eyes cold, "And you made him lose his life." Hollis looked down, silent. "Death brings peace," he said softly. "I've had to live with it for 40 years. When the interrogation ended, Carver stepped outside into a light rain. She knew the case still had a long road ahead, but the most important part was done. Reporters waited in front of headquarters, lenses trained on the car taking Hollis away. He sat still, face weary, blue and red lights flickering on his silver hair. The sight stunned the whole town. That evening, national news ran the headline, "Alabama Cold Case Solved, After 42 Years. Pastor Arrested for Murder." All of Athens was plunged into shock. The townspeople were divided, some furious, others grieving, some refusing to believe. But for Jack Zellman, seeing that image on the screen, he only closed his eyes softly. "Finally, Grandpa's been vindicated," he said. Carver sat in her car, watching the church lights reflect on the wet pavement. She knew by morning, this news would flood across America, but for her, the case wasn't a victory. It was a reminder that sometimes justice comes too late, and truth always comes at a cost. Wheeler Lake lay silent out there, but now, it could no longer keep its secrets. After his arrest, Raymond Hollis was transferred to the Limestone County Jail to await formal questioning. He remained silent for 3 days, refusing to answer any questions. Only when Lieutenant Megan Carver came to see him directly did he speak. In the small room, fluorescent lights casting on his aged face, Hollis sat up straight, hands clasped, voice low and deliberate. "Yes," he said, "I hit him, but I didn't mean to kill him." Carver didn't respond, just turned on the recorder. Hollis began to recount, voice even, without trembling. That day, he knew Arthur would visit his wife at the nursing home. He waited for him on the road near Piney Creek, with the old hammer in his Ford. "I just wanted to talk, but he got angry. He said I wasn't worthy of the Zellman name. Then he threatened to get me defrocked." Hollis clenched his fists. "I'd lost everything, do you understand? The church, my wife, my honor. I just wanted him to hear me." The argument turned violent. Arthur got out of the car. Hollis grabbed the hammer from the trunk and struck him hard on the head. He fell to the ground, still breathing. Hollis said, eyes sunken, "I panicked, thought he was dead. I figured if they believed it was suicide, I'd be safe." He recounted dragging the body into the car, pushing the Caprice down the slope. "The car slid faster than I thought. I stood and watched it disappear under the water. I prayed right then, but God didn't listen." Carver noted every word, but something made her suspicious. In the forensic file, the blow was too forceful for a frail old man like Hollis to have inflicted. "Did you do it alone?" she asked. Hollis hesitated a few seconds, then replied softly, "No, I wasn't strong enough. I called my brother, Earl Hollis. He worked painting cars in Huntsville. I told him to help move the car. He owed me, so he agreed." That name caught Carver's attention. Earl Hollis, never mentioned in the files. She quickly checked and found Earl had worked at River Auto Paint Shop, died in 1990 in a work accident. Hollis continued, "I told him to come to Piney Creek that night. We used rope to pull the Caprice to the edge of the slope. I drove the Ford. He pushed. When the car slid down, I saw him smile. He said, 'Don't worry, brother, no one will find it.' Then he went quiet, never spoke of it again." Carver kept her face calm, but inside, a strange feeling rose, another piece fitting into place. She recalled the latest forensic report, a foreign DNA sample in the Caprice, not matching Arthur or Hollis. Initial results identified it as male, close blood relation, but identity unknown. Now everything made sense. When Carver mentioned it, Hollis nodded faintly. "He was there with me, but he's dead now. What more do you want?" She replied, "The truth." Hollis looked her straight in the eye. "The truth is I've lived in sin for 40 years. Every service, I preached forgiveness, but I never received it myself." The next day, Carver reported to the state prosecutor. DNA analysis confirmed the second person in the car was Earl Hollis, Raymond's brother. Hospital records from Huntsville matched 100% with the sample found in the car, a irrefutable piece of evidence. In the press conference, Carver presented briefly, the Arthur Zellman case wasn't a solo act. Two men were involved, Raymond Hollis and his brother Earl Hollis. One is dead, one faces justice. The media was stunned. Athens residents, still reeling from the pastor's arrest, now learned he hadn't acted alone. In the jail, Hollis was informed of the DNA results. He sat silent for a long time, then said, "I knew. He did the heavy lifting. I just let it happen." Carver asked, "Why didn't you confess sooner?" Hollis looked up, eyes clouded. Who would believe it? A pastor admitting to killing his father-in-law. Do you think people would forgive that? As Carver left the interrogation room, Hollis called after her. "Tell them I didn't hate Arthur. I was just jealous because everyone respected him more than me." Carver paused at the door, without turning. "I will, but the court will only hear the truth." That day, major news outlets ran headlines. Cold case twist, second man involved in 1982, Alabama murder identified. Articles described the case as a tragedy of two brothers, a pastor and a car painter, swept into greed and hatred. Jack Zellman was notified first. Hearing that a second man had helped Hollis dispose of the car, he only said, "At least now, my grandfather didn't die in some stupid accident. He was murdered, and they know it." He went to Wheeler Lake, placing a bunch of white flowers by the water's edge. "Grandpa," he whispered, "the truth has surfaced, just like that car." In the concluding report, Carver wrote, "Based on the confession and forensic results, the Zellman case is ruled intentional homicide. Two suspects, Raymond Hollis, age 85, and Earl Hollis, deceased 1990. The case closes with the full truth restored after 42 years. As she signed it, dawn was breaking outside the window. Wheeler Lake remained still, but in Carver's heart, those seemingly motionless waters were flowing again, carrying justice for the man once forgotten. The trial of Raymond Hollis was held at the Lauderdale County Courthouse in Florence on a rainy June morning. 42 years after Arthur Zellman's disappearance, the courtroom was packed. Press, locals, and even old parishioners who had once heard Hollis preach. The air was thick, compressed by 4 decades of waiting. In the front row, Jack Zellman sat ramrod straight, hands clasped tightly. Across the room, Hollis sat in his gray prison jumpsuit, white hair, gaunt face, eyes as still as ashes. Alabama State Prosecutor Mary Ann Griggs opened with a firm voice, "We're here not just to talk about a disappearance, but to restore honor to a man buried in lies." She laid out the reconstructed chain of evidence step by step: Arthur's DNA found in the car, brown paint matching Hollis's Ford, the $5,000 withdrawal from the victim's account using a forged power of attorney, and a second DNA test, confirming the involvement of Earl Hollis, the suspect's brother. A series of photos appeared on the projector screen: the silver Caprice dredged from Wheeler Lake, the paint-stained jacket, the rusty hammer, the bank withdrawal slip, and the DNA reports. The final piece of evidence was a recording of Hollis's confession, his voice hoarse, "I hit him. I just wanted him to shut up. I didn't expect the car to sink that fast." The courtroom fell silent. When the prosecutor paused, only the soft patter of rain on the window panes remained. Griggs looked at the jury, speaking slowly, "This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. And that choice stole Arthur Zellman's life, then hid it under water for 40 years. Defense attorney Caleb Moore stood. He didn't deny the incident, but tried to redirect. "My client is an old man, with failing memory. He admits to a confrontation, but no intent to kill. It was an accident, a shove in the heat of anger, not murder." Moore cited mitigating factors: Hollis's cooperation with the investigation, his confession, and a life lived in regret for 40 years. "A pastor couldn't live with guilt if it was premeditated murder," he said, trying to stir compassion. But the prosecutor fired back immediately. A man can live a lifetime with guilt if he believes he's hidden it. She emphasized the deliberate chain of actions from the hammer attack, calling his brother for help, staging a false scene, to withdrawing money with a forged power of attorney. This was a plan, not an accident, she said. No one accidentally forges someone else's signature and pushes a car into a lake. Over 2 days, witnesses took the stand one by one. Gerald Baines, the former bank manager, confirmed Hollis had come in to withdraw money with the power of attorney. A forensic technician described the brown paint flecks on the car door. Lieutenant Megan Carver recounted the case's unraveling, from reopening the file, sonar scans, dredging the car, to tracking down Hollis. Her voice was steady, but each detail hushed the room. When it was his turn, Hollis took the stand. He didn't deny the act, only saying, "I was wrong. I got angry, and I hit him. I thought he was dead. I'm not a monster, just a weak man." His voice trembled, eyes fixed on the floor. "I've prayed every day for 40 years. Maybe the Lord grew tired of hearing me beg for forgiveness." The prosecutor asked directly, "Did you intend to push the car into the water?" Hollis was silent. She continued, "Did you call your brother for help?" This time he nodded faintly. The room gasped. Griggs looked at the jury. No further words needed. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the 12-person jury retired to deliberate. The air outside was taut as a bowstring. Jack Zellman sat motionless, eyes on the wooden floor. Carver stood by the window, listening to the rain drumming the glass, her heart heavy as lead. 3 hours passed before the door opened, and everyone held their breath. The court clerk stood and read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant Raymond Hollis guilty of second-degree murder." The courtroom erupted, sobs, murmurs, the judge's gavel banging for order. Hollis bowed his head, lips moving as if in prayer. Judge Eleanor Price read the sentence, based on the evidence and the severity of the crime. Defendant Raymond Hollis is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. She paused, her voice measured. Justice may be delayed, but it never disappears. Jack looked toward Hollis, not with hatred, but exhaustion. He murmured, 40 years, finally over. Carver placed a hand on his shoulder, saying, "Only your grandfather can rest now." As Hollis was led out, reporters jostled for photos. He said nothing, just glanced out the window to the distant Tennessee River under hazy sunlight. Perhaps in that moment, he too knew the secret he'd hidden for half a lifetime had been carried back to justice by the water. That evening, national news opened with the Chiron, Florence, Alabama, pastor sentenced to life in 1982, murder case. At Wheeler Lake, a gentle wind stirred, the surface rippling under moonlight. There, 4 decades ago, a man had been killed and buried in silence. Now, the lake held only peace, the kind Arthur Zellman had finally reclaimed. After the Florence trial, news of Pastor Raymond Hollis's life sentence spread like wildfire across Alabama. Athens, the quiet town that once saw Hollis as its spiritual guide, suddenly became the epicenter of shock. Press, radio, and TV all portrayed him as a fallen icon, man of God, forgotten killer. For many locals, the case wasn't just a crime, but a direct blow to the faith they'd placed in the church. The morning after, Athens Baptist Church, where Hollis had preached for 30 years, was temporarily sealed off. The front doors locked tight, the Sunday worship 10 a.m. sign, still hanging crooked, swaying in the wind. A few loyal parishioners still came, bringing flowers and candles to place on the steps, like a memorial for the man who had once saved them, though now he was a murderer. Others protested, saying praying for Hollis insulted Arthur Zellman's soul. The divided scene played out right on the church lawn, one half silently praying, the other half weeping over the betrayal. The Florence Daily Times ran a banner headline, "Sin Beneath the Holy Robe." Editors mined the case not just as a crime story, but as a lesson in faith and forgiveness. An editorial read, "If faith is misplaced, it blinds us to justice." For 40 years, Athens bowed to a preacher of the Lord, while he hid sin in his heart. Those words shook the town to its core. Those who had known Hollis couldn't accept the truth. Ruth Denham, the church organist for 2 decades, said through tears, "He baptized my child, married me. I can't believe he could kill. But seeing the evidence, I can't deny it." A younger group of parishioners raged, accusing Hollis of exploiting religion to cover his sins. They demanded the church be renamed, all his images removed. Religious scholars began public debates. A seminary in Birmingham hosted a symposium titled, "Faith and Fallibility: The Limits of Morality in Religion." There, many speakers highlighted Hollis as a textbook case of sin sanctified by prayer. Another pastor stated, "It's not God who errs, but men who use God's name to evade sin." In Florence, Lieutenant Megan Carver was invited to a TV panel. Asked for her thoughts, she replied, "Justice doesn't discriminate by religion." Hollis may have been a pastor, but he was still human, and humans can sin. The tragedy is the whole community bearing the consequences of a lie too long. Her words silenced the room. Meanwhile, the Zellman family was finally invited to reclaim Arthur's mementos found in the car: a leather wallet, silver-framed glasses, and a bank envelope. Jack Zellman opened the evidence bag right at the Florence Police Department. Touching the old photo in the wallet, his eyes blurred. "This is the first time I've seen Grandpa's face in 40 years, he said. Beside him, Helen Zellman, Arthur's daughter, long gone from Alabama, nodded quietly. She had returned to the town for the first time since her mother's death. "I used to dread coming back here," she whispered. "But maybe he wanted me to see that truth can't stay buried under water forever." Police handed over the items in a solemn ceremony. Carver personally gave Jack the sealed bank envelope. "Thank you," he said. "Without you, this file would still be dust." Carver replied simply, "No one deserves to be forgotten." A week later, the community held a memorial for Arthur Zellman at Green Hill Cemetery. His grave was finally inscribed with "Rediscovered in 2024, Justice after 42 years. Residents from Athens, Florence, and even Hollis's old parishioners attended. Amid hundreds of candles, Jack stood before the grave, reading a short prayer: "You've waited too long to hear this, that everyone knows the truth." After the ceremony, many papers published a photo of the grave with the caption, "Not just Arthur Zellman was found again, but Alabama's faith and justice too." As for Hollis, the man who once preached salvation, he now sat in a Montgomery cell, quietly staring out barred windows. He no longer preached, only read the Bible in silence. A guard recounted, he wrote "I lied to God" on the wall, then erased it. Perhaps in his remaining years, Hollis faced only himself, and the sound of Wheeler Lake's water he heard in his dreams. Athens never returned to what it was. The church closed indefinitely, parishioners scattered, but amid the wreckage, one thing endured: the memory of Arthur Zellman, a man lost, but who ultimately awakened the whole town. And in the sorrow, a quiet peace flickered. Justice may come late, but it always finds its way home. Dawn stretched across Wheeler Lake, soft light spilling onto the glassy surface. The lake mirrored the clear sky after days of rain, like a vast pane of glass. Lieutenant Megan Carver stood on the shore, silently gazing at the site of a 42-year-old crime. Everything now felt strangely serene, only the wind whispering over the water, and the calls of early birds. She exhaled in quiet relief. The Arthur Zellman, 1982 case was closed. Justice, though late, had finally taken shape. A small boat glided out to the lake's center. Jack Zellman held the oars, with Ruth, Arthur's granddaughter, beside him. On board, they carried a basket of white daisies and sprigs of lavender, the flowers he'd once planted around the porch. Midway across, Jack whispered, "Down here you waited 40 years." Ruth nodded, eyes misty. Together, they leaned over, releasing the flowers onto the surface. Petals swirled, drifting outward, forming a soft white trail on the deep blue water. Carver watched from the bank, a strange feeling rising, peace mingled with sadness. Early sunlight caught the mist, casting a warm golden hue. All the case's noises faded into the distance: sonar pings, cable creaks, Hollis's confession and interrogation. They receded, leaving only the stillness of now. Finally, everything's in its place, she thought. As the last flowers slipped from their hands, Jack looked up, scanning the shimmering lake. "Grandpa, justice has come," he murmured, voice choked. Ruth took his hand. "He sees it all." They watched the white petal trail dissolve into the waves. Carver walked to the water's edge, resting a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Without you, this file would still be dust." Jack smiled. "Without you, we'd never have found him." They fell silent, hearing only the lap of water on shore. In the distance, Athens' church bells tolled, familiar, yet sadder now, like a farewell. Hollis served life in Montgomery. His church stood shuttered, and Athens still learned to forget. Locals spoke less of the case, more of its lesson in faith, that sin, cloaked in prayer, would still be exposed by light. But in Alabama's state archives, the Zellman file held a special place, testament to cases justice never abandons. Carver opened her bag, pulling the final paper from the file. "Case closed, May 2024. She'd handwritten a line, "For the truth that never drowned." She folded the paper, tied it to a small bouquet, and released it into the water. It floated briefly, then sank, carrying the last investigator's farewell. The sun climbed higher, light dappling the lake like silver filigree. Carver glanced around, a faint smile crossing her face. 42 years, a long journey through memory, sin and redemption. Now, only peace remained. She turned to Jack and Ruth. "Arthur Zellman rests easy, and maybe Wheeler Lake does too." The small boat turned back to shore. Carver lingered on the bank, watching until it blended into the sunlight. The lake rippled, white petals still bobbing. A white heron flew over, its wings brushing the surface, leaving a sparkling trail like silk ribbon. In that instant, Carver felt every piece of her life, the sweat, the sleepless nights, worth it. She headed back along the path to the parking lot. Wind carried scents of fresh grass and gentle waves, like Wheeler Lake's goodbye. At the exit, a new wooden sign stood, white letters etched bold, "Alabama, 1982, case closed." Carver touched the words lightly, whispering, "Light finally reaches the water." Then she left, the serene lake behind her, where crime once lay buried, and justice at last was found. The Wheeler Lake story reminds us, in today's American life, that justice arrives through three things together: persistent people, vigilant communities, and timely technology. Lieutenant Carver rejected the hasty suicide conclusion, re-examining every link: the too tidy house, rusty hammer in the shed, Caprice's rear window shattered inward, brown paint streak matching the 1980 Ford, and the $5,000 withdrawal, via forged power of attorney. Practical advice for every family. 1. Protect seniors from financial abuse. Set up real-time bank alerts. Require two-factor for unusual transactions, and have grandkids check sudden powers of attorney. Details from the first Decatur envelope and withdrawal slip prove papers can tell the truth when people lie. Don't idolize spiritual or social authority. A pastor like Hollis can still err. Trust but verify. If someone, even a community leader, suddenly asks directions to a remote spot like Piney Creek, or pushes asset transfers, note it, report to police, or seek legal advice. 3. Document and keep records. Old statements, car photos, journals saved this case, after 42 years, in daily life. Archive emails, contracts, medical care logs, to shield you in disputes. 4. Harness community, plus tech civilian divers from deep water search Alabama. And 3. Sonar show locals can fill public resource gaps in your area. Join Neighborhood Watch. Train in search and rescue. Learn 311 911's reporting skills. 5. Persist like Jack and Ruth. Write letters. Demand reinvestigation. Tip-off press. FOIA. Public records laws in the U.S. empower citizens for transparency. Ultimately, nurture mental health and honest family talks. Prolonged silences let evil hide in faith's shadow. Light only hits the water when we all shine our lamps. Thank you for following this journey to bring truth from Wheeler Lake's depths back to light. If you believe justice always deserves to be found, hit subscribe to join us for the next cases. See you in the next video, where we reopen files thought long dormant and let light shine on the water once more.